All right, I'd love to welcome everyone to Rediscovering You this evening. My name is Patricia Maltz. I'm here with founder Barb Green, and she's in New Mexico. And we're glad to have her and Judy Peterson from Minnesota. So we're glad she's here as well. And our guest tonight is Jenna Zark. Now, Jenna, we were introduced to through Mickey Banovich, who many of you might know from past experiences with Rediscovering You. She helped Barb a lot, and she was raving about Jenna because she was writing a book and collecting stories at the senior facility where Mickey lives, and Mickey was so impressed with her. And Jenna is an award-winning author and playwright. And once we announced that she was coming to speak, we got Barb got the thing about how up in the world we have become with Rediscovering You to have these fabulous people like Jenna Zark. So perhaps some of you have seen her plays in St. Paul or in New York, who knows where all they've been. And I'm going to let Jenna talk about what she's doing currently and then talk a little bit about her book, but she also has some interactive entertainment for us. So we don't know exactly what that is, but I don't think it includes, what is it that I keep wanting to do, Barb? Improv comedy. It doesn't probably include improv comedy. Okay, so, all right, Jenna, would you love to take it away and let's talk?
Absolutely. Well, I'll have to remember that next time I come on about interactive improv. What I really wanted was not so much entertainment, but to talk with everyone here about what they're going through. I started writing Crooked Lines because as a single mom, I found that celebrating holidays could be very, very challenging. And my question to everyone here is, are you finding that too? Have you found, if you were newly divorced or divorced a while, that celebrating things like Passover or Christmas or Ramadan or any particular holiday that involved family, was that a challenge for you? How was it for you? So that's where I'd like to start with questions to you.
I can share a little bit. My daughters were adults and lived out of state when I divorced, but still the holidays were really hard. At the beginning, I was told though, by someone who had experienced this, she said, just plan ahead, have people around you. If you want people around you, be by yourself if you need to be by yourself. And she said she would plan for the big holidays, but then it was like the long holiday weekends, like the 4th of July, that kind of threw her for a loop because she didn't realize how much that would impact her as well. And she said she got through the first year just fine because she had kind of prepared. And so she didn't do it the second year. And she said the second year it really was harder because she hadn't figured out what to do. For me personally, I remember Passover. And I think Thanksgiving, because we would go to my cousin's house for dinner. And I felt like the weird aunt that nobody knows what to do with, the strange, weird aunt that sort of shows up and confuses everybody. And it bothered me for a while. And then I thought, oh no, I'm going to claim that spot. I love being the strange, weird aunt that shows up. So that made it fun for me. But I had to reevaluate a lot what the holidays meant for me personally. And how I wanted to celebrate them or not celebrate them or do something totally different. I remember just going to Minnehaha Falls on a holiday and journaling, sitting by the water and journaling. That was how I was going to celebrate the holiday. So I got I trusted where I felt I needed to be. Does that make sense?
Good, good.
Yes, and that's exactly why I wrote Crooked Lines, so that people who didn't have conventional partnerships or families could talk about and think about their own holidays, what they meant, that just because you're not celebrating in a conventional way doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't welcome. And I remember those Seders too, where I felt like such a stranger in a strange land, and it's just not easy. And anyway, and that's why I wanted to write about it. And I can read a little from here about that. I don't know if there's anyone else though, Judy or Pat, who wants to speak to this before I
Judy,
read.
do you have anything?
Well, I'm not divorced, so it might be a little tricky for me, but the only thing I can relate to is I have a granddaughter who's 18 and she's has some problems and had to go to a boarding school away from home, 5 hours away from home. And she writes me letters and she said, it's so lonesome. I don't know what I'm going to do for Thanksgiving. So I doesn't matter who you are, if you're divorced or if you're just a single person on your own, or you're a child at college or at boarding school. It's hard. It's very hard.
Right, definitely is. Well, I share a little bit about my stories. I am divorced, but it was so long ago, I don't even remember being married. So, it's been a while. So, and I had 2 children, and for me, I had custody of the kids. So they were with me all the time. And my former husband did not really have a childhood that had a lot of rituals in it. And so he would want to have a holiday dinner, Thanksgiving or Easter or whatever. And so I would just say, that's fine. You can have the kids. We lived in the same town, so it wasn't a problem. But the kids were really funny because they figured out how to manage their time with him. And they would go there and take naps, then they'd get up and eat, and then they'd come home. It was really funny how they managed to figure that out. So, but from the other part that was interesting is that I'm the oldest in my family I have a sister and 3 brothers, and I was the oldest. I divorced. My sister later divorced and remarried. But I was always the strange duck out, like, what's wrong with you? Why are, and there's a lot that I could improve on, but it was always a very interesting feeling of being the odd duck out in the various things that we did as a family. Unfortunately, it seems that the girls in my family end up getting divorced, because now we have 2 more divorced girls in the family. And I'm going, they're saying, what is it about these girls in this family? And are they all this independent? But it could be that we are. So that's my story about holidays.
Wow. Well, what I did, I'll read you a little bit about the Jewish New Year, where I found myself in a restaurant with a Catholic friend, because I had nowhere to go. And, you're in this Twin Cities isn't where I'm from originally. And I remember my sister saying something to me like, well, when you're divorced, you have to make new all new friends. And I did start doing that, but a lot of them were not Jewish. So I had a very interesting Jewish New Year's, and I'll read you a little bit about it. It's called Rosh Hashanah Restaurant. So Rosh Hashanah means New Year, Jewish New Year. You hear it in synagogues by swaying congregations, whole swaths of people rising like the moon. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed, who shall live and who shall die. On Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, you don't use noisemakers or drink champagne. The start of 10 days of repentance lets you begin a new slate only if you're up for some serious soul searching. The synagogues are packed, and many attend only this time of year because Rosh Hashanah is designated as the time when our names are written in the book of life for the coming year, or not. If you hope to change things, you must pray and ask forgiveness. The literal word for this process is tshuva, which means turning, as in turning yourself around. Culturally, it's the opposite of our supposedly non-judgmental culture. Though if you ever use social media, you know how judgmental we can be. But the idea here is not to live and let live. It's instead to say who will live, who is living well, and who maybe will die. The night Rosh Hashanah began, I was sitting in Muffaletta, a restaurant near the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. You guys may know where that is. I was not supposed to be there because it is Yom Tov, a holy day when one should not be at a restaurant where money is exchanged. I was with my new Catholic friend, John, who offered to be my Rosh Hashanah Goy, non-Jew, and pay for the meal so I wouldn't have to open my purse during the holiday. We met in December the year before when I came to his house to interview an Arctic explorer for a play. John was one of the explorer's roommates, struggling with the breakup of a long-time relationship. Since I was struggling with the same thing, both of us held on to each other for dear life. When people asked if our relationship was romantic, I said no. It wasn't an attraction type thing. It was a lot more like water in a drought when friends were hard to come by. As I picked up the menu, I thought, this is probably not going to get me into any books of life. But John, who is a lawyer, said if anyone was judging, I could try and explain the mitigating circumstances. I had been in Minnesota just a few years, and most of the Jewish people I knew were congregants in my former husband's synagogue. I was divorced barely 2 months and didn't want to spend the evening staring at the walls while my son was with his father. So, muffalettas. It may not have been the best way to observe the high holiday, but one cannot always choose the time of one's transformation. And in the last few months, I felt I had transformed enough. Salad. Yes, it wasn't terribly kosher to be in a restaurant, but I was still attempting. I tried to explain this to John, starting with the separation of dairy and meat, moving to the kinds of meat you could have, and then separating meat and dairy dishes. A Jewish director had once told me, because God wanted us to be vegetarian, kosher laws were created to annoy you every time you wanted meat, I recalled. I brought up the Book of Life and we discussed the afterlife. As a Catholic, John was puzzled by the Jews' approach, which seemed to be there isn't one, and left him completely confused. Wasn't the Book of Life proof there was some eternal one inviting people to heaven? I always thought it meant your life extended another year and you wouldn't die in horrific circumstances. But then these 10 days have always confused me too. On the other hand, the notion of punishing those who don't repent enough through illness or death leaves me with deep ambivalence about the judgment. If we see it as an allegory, I said. What's the point, said John. Why do any of it if it's only allegorical? I don't know, I sighed. John laughed, and we both said, anyway, at the same time. I told him to go first. Well, there's a saying about how God paints in crooked lines, said John. It's never a straight line, not straightforward. I like that, I said. We ordered vegetarian, and I turned the forks and spoons over, trying to decide if we were really meant to be judging ourselves. If your marriage derailed, what part did you play in breaking it? If you're sitting in a restaurant instead of at the home of a Jewish friend, what can you do to make it count as a real Jewish holiday? Then my friend pulled something out of his satchel. Since it's New Year's, he said, I thought you should have a present. I looked up in surprise. We don't do gifts at New Year's, I started to say, but he cut me off, saying something about his way of celebrating while handing me a present and an envelope. I opened the gift to find a framed photograph of me at his daughter's birthday party, both arms raised with a big smile. You looked so happy here, John said, and I leaned forward to look at the picture, surprised to see my expression of joy, something I had not expected to feel, yet it was clearly present. Anyway, I thought you should have this, he said, looking at the envelope. When I opened it, I found a check made out to me for $100. What's this? Anne Frank, he replied, and I knew immediately what he meant. A few weeks before, John had written a column about Anne Frank for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. It was about how she could not be lumped in with other victims of other wars or even genocides, how one size did not fit all because we are all individuals whose stories are not transferable to other agendas. At the time the column was written, newspapers paid on occasion to run them, so John received $100 for his work. He also knew when I moved out of my former home, I left behind my first family sukkah. I wanted to buy you a new sukkah for your brand new life, he said. And that's for the Jewish holiday of Sukkot, where Jews put up a little house or a booth. I had to bite my lip to stop tears from filling my eyes. So, Muffaletta, if you're ever divorced, find yourself alone on Jewish New Year's, you do not have to go there. But if you do, you might find a fresh start between the garlic spread and salad, or the one who paints in crooked lines, leading us to the people we're supposed to meet. This one brought me a sukkah and a picture of me smiling, perhaps an early hint of future joys, and a high holy day I could write about in a book of my own.
Wow, very nice.
Yeah.
Very engaging. Like it. Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Well, I just thought, that these holidays, there's so much about family, and there's so much about, observing any one particular ritual. And I think they have a lot more importance in our lives than we give them credit for. So that's like what drew me to write about them.
Wow. Wow. How do you then take that information forward for your son and talk about it in different ways?
Well, for him, there were specific holidays that we would go to and celebrate. And I found we were celebrating them, we were having fun, but they were totally different than what we might expect. So let me see if I have a chapter about that. I do have a funny chapter that I could read you, but this is about, I was going to pick him up one day and it was the Jewish holiday for trees. And I nearly crashed into a tree and was killed. So that was kind of wild, but this one is a little bit more about the Jewish holiday of Purim and explaining that with children. And I think that was something that he learned very differently than he would have at his dad's house. So let me see if I can find that one. One parent Purim, I'll try that. See how that goes. So begins, okay, I know you're out there, a freshly made, unsuspecting single parent. You see other families celebrating Jewish holidays and look at your child, feeling like you have only half a family to give. And that half is mostly empty, like a hollowed out log. Because observant Jewish families usually have two parents. My first Purim holiday as a single mom happened with my friend John, who, like me, was trying to stay afloat on the sea of single parenthood. Purim celebrates the ability of Jews to survive concerted attempts to destroy them and is one of our most joyous holidays. To celebrate, I brought my son Nate to my friend's house with a box of 3-sided pastries we call Hamantaschen and 4-finger puppets bought at a synagogue gift shop. I bought them because my son, like his mom before him, was a creative child, given to weaving stories with handkerchiefs, trucks, and imaginary friends. The puppets were hardly masterpieces with round button eyes that had roving dots in the center that often made them look cross-eyed. Queen Esther had curly blonde hair, frizzing out horizontally, which couldn't have been remotely accurate. Her son Mordecai, the king, and his evil vizier Haman looked so goofy, I almost thought of using handkerchiefs instead, but decided against it as I already paid for the puppets. Nate had heard the Megillah scroll, Purim story, read at the synagogue where his father worked, but I knew he hadn't understood much, as the story is chanted in Hebrew. The story of Queen Esther, who married the Persian king Ahasuerus after he banished his former queen Vashti, and Esther's struggle to save the Jewish people would be lost on my 4-year-old boy. So today was supposed to be about giving Nate and my friend's children a more child-friendly Purim story, if I could manage it. The year before, I had been at synagogue with Nate and his dad, and before Nate was born, his father and I had been with a congregation in Indiana. My favorite Purim there was when the rabbi dressed in a white wedding gown, intoning passages from the Purim story in falsetto, and Nate's dad was dressed as Boy George. He and I had argued briefly over borrowing one of my favorite jackets, which had felt vaguely like an episode of MASH with a fight between Hot Lips and Klinger. But I did end up giving him the jacket, and he and the rabbi had made an entertaining comedy team. The next year, I had no synagogue to attend, as I hadn't yet joined another. I also hadn't the first idea how I was going to celebrate. I told John it was a Jewish holiday, but not much more. Now I stood in his kitchen, listening to his 3 children play with my own, trying to figure out how to create a family Purim with what felt like a puppet family rather than a real one. Just a few months earlier, I'd been part of a synagogue community where Nate's dad had explained the holidays. Now I was on my own, without a trajectory someone else defined or an armature of structured support. So I did what I always did when I'm in trouble: tell a story. I called out to my son, ready to share some of this hamantaschen. 4 pairs of feet scurried into the kitchen, and as I handed out the pastries, I started talking. Once upon a time, there was a stupid king. I started that way because it was exactly what I heard my teacher say when I was in Hebrew day school, and I always thought it was a great way to begin. This king did whatever his advisors told him, I said, and they wanted his wife Vashti to dance for him. She refused, so they banished her. How did that make the king stupid? My friend's daughter Allison asked. He listened to his advisors without listening to his wife or caring about the consequences, I replied. And then the king became very lonely without his wife and realized he would need someone. I picked up the finger puppets to continue the story. And then the king became very lonely, and he called for all the women in his kingdom to come to a gathering where he could choose a new wife. No one in the Jewish community wanted to go because one of the king's advisors was a very evil man named Haman who wanted to kill the Jews. Why? Allison asked again. He wanted people to bow down to him, and Jewish people would only bow when they were praying to God. So Haman made it very hard for the Jews, plotting to make war on them. But a man named Mordecai convinced his niece to attend the gathering in hopes she might marry and gain the ear of the king. The children's eyes were wide, intent, and fixed on the puppets as I moved them around the kitchen table. I explained how Esther tried to blend into the crowd, how the king was taken with her and selected her out of all the others, and how she grew close to him and eventually saved her people by telling him of Haman's plans. I explained how hamantaschen are meant to symbolize Haman's hat and how we eat them as a symbol of victory. By the time I finished telling the story, I realized I didn't need anyone else to give my son a piece of his heritage, which was in itself kind of victory. I say this because, again, I know you're out there. Maybe this parenting business is new to you too. And the thought of doing it alone is enough to send you screaming into the night. So I wanted to share what Purim taught me this year. You don't need to depend on anyone else to teach your kids about holidays. Whatever you do with them is fine, as long as you make them yours.
Fun. Fun. I'd never heard the full story, so thank you. That was
Oh,
good.
you're welcome.
That was good. Perfect.
Your writing
Well,
is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I like the descriptions.
Yes. Yes. Aren't they engaging?
Well, it made me think of like a non-religious holiday I had. I don't even think I was divorced yet, but my older daughter and I ended up in Boston with my brother for Thanksgiving. And he lived in in Cambridge, but it was a 3-flight up narrow little apartment, like
Oh, wow.
stood in
Yeah.
the kitchen and you stretched out your arms, you could touch both walls. So my daughter and it was Thanksgiving. She goes, I'm going to make Thanksgiving dinner. You guys set the table. So we open up a card table in the living room, in quotes, in the other room. And we set the table. So she comes out first with a family-sized box of Kraft macaroni and cheese in a big bowl, all done. a plate of cottage cheese with canned peaches on top of that. And I think some canned heated up green beans or something. It was the most wonderful Thanksgiving, the most memorable Thanksgiving I think I've ever had. It was, I can't even tell you the joy that we had, how much fun we had that evening. So
Sounds like you did. It
It
sounds
really
like
did.
it was just, it was like, it just sounds completely rebellious and fun because of that.
yeah. So I totally agree with you that you can create whatever you need to fill or to maybe recreate or rediscover what a holiday means to you, how you want to celebrate or acknowledge it, or what you want to pass on of it to your children, you know, what meaning you want them to take away, what values do you want them to learn from it, things like that, what joy. I remember there, Passover is my favorite holiday, but growing up, my brother still both did not like Passover Seders because they were very stressful. Everybody was very nervous. And so my brother, he will run away. If you say, come over for a Seder, he'll run the other direction. But my kids, because the way we did it, it was joyous. And so those memories they'll always have of the singing and the laughing and the conversations and all the food, and just, it was a whole different feeling to what we grew up with, of just embracing. It's my favorite holiday. Plus it's about freedom, you know, what is freedom? What does it mean? What are your responsibilities when it comes to freedom and freeing other people? And so that's a whole different topic for another time. But anyway, so I just had to share that.
Yeah.
I think that's so true. You can grow up with this one vision of how your family did a holiday like Passover. Like I had my uncle Irving was the sternest gentleman, and he did the whole Haggadah, the whole story of Passover, and the children couldn't leave the table without asking to be excused. And in order to do that, we had to wait until he had his coffee. And it was just, you know, I didn't like it, at least until we started eating the meal. But years later, my son had first a babysitter, and she became a family friend. She made the Seder so much fun. And she would have toys and little frogs and bugs you could throw at each other, and games, and it was so much fun. I had no idea that a Seder could be like that. And it was just, you know, not your uncle's Seder, you know?
Judy, what kind of holiday stories do you have?
Oh my goodness. Well, my mother just loved to cook. And so it was, everybody all went over to her place, and she just made the best food. And after we had this fabulous dinner, she'd bring out this tray of fudge and divinity and Congo bars and pretzels and homemade peanut butter, peanut brittle. And then we opened the presents, and it wasn't when my husband had his, we went over to his house. And usually when we were married, it was like we'd go to his house like about 10 o'clock, and then we'd have brunch, and then we'd leave and drive an hour and go to my mom's house and have dinner. So it was a madhouse. And opening the presents at my mom's house was like everybody opened their present at the same time, but at my husband's, house, they opened, everybody had theirs individually. So you waited for one person and the next person and the next person, and then they all had stories. So much different, but both places we just had a lot of fun. And, that's the one time the family always got together. So you really looked forward to seeing everybody and sharing stories and what are you doing, and the kids back from college and the new babies coming in. And so it was always a lot of fun.
Neat.
I
neat.
like that. And how many families are there where people are separated or divorced or even just have different in-laws, and you just end up having to have 2 meals that day?
Yeah.
2 huge meals.
Well, you could eat as much as you
one.
wanted, but yeah.
Yeah, it's challenging. I know for my daughter, who divorced, she had her former husband, his family always celebrated Christmas on Christmas Eve. And so the kids would go and spend the time with him, and then they'd come back home. And then on Christmas morning, her tradition that she started was to have a Christmas breakfast and with the kids and myself, and then we would do the presents at that point. But it's interesting how you can create all of these things yourself. The other challenge that we had in my family was my son was actually born on Christmas Day. And so then how do you manage, that holiday situation and have it be fair to him and all those kinds of things. So when I was married and I had the kids and they were younger, we would have Christmas Eve as the time to open the presents. And then Christmas Day was the birthday day. So, how do you work around all of these different activities with kids and stuff? It takes a little thinking.
It
Yeah.
does. And one of the other things I do want to bring up is at my sister-in-law, she has taken over the family huge party. My husband has 5 sisters, but there are a couple that are divorced, and they always invite the divorced husbands, ex-husbands there,
Mhm.
and everybody's very welcoming and friendly, and we just all get along. And it's just something that we take into consideration, because we do know how hard it is for people that are single and don't have any place to go.
Right. It is. And the other part of that is that they have been part of your life for a
Right.
period of time. And those relationships don't just, collapse.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's remarkable that everyone, would be able to do it.
Yeah, well, not everyone is, but I understand, it's in cases where you can, that's great. That's really great. So, well, Jenna, thank you. We certainly appreciate your sharing your book and your stories and prompting this conversation. And I'm sure that the people who watch this video will think about their own holiday stories and their challenges at, both with their extended families and with their own children, and how they can redefine holidays for themselves to be whatever it is they want them to be. But thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, if people are interested in Crooked Lines, they can find it. Crooked Lines, A Single Mom's Jewish Journey, at my website, jennazark.com, JENNAZARK. And you just see Crooked Lines up there, and then click on it and you'll be able to scroll down and find the links to buy it.
Well, perfect. And Jenna, do you have any current plays that are being performed in the Twin Cities area?
I do not currently, but I am developing a musical with a wonderful composer and we're under contract with a company called Northern Skies. So with any luck, we'll be able to develop that musical. It's totally different, not about this subject at all, not Jewish. It's about well, I probably shouldn't say because it's not good luck, but
Oh, okay.
it's a fun story, and I can let you know more about it in the future.
Yes, do. We'll put it in our newsletter once it's ready. We'd like to celebrate all the
Thank
great
you.
things that our women are doing, because we're thriving and being successful in our journeys. So this is great. Perfect. Well, I'm going to turn off the recording. So thank you, everyone. This has been great. Hold on a second.